Let me tell you something that a lot of people don't understand about relationships. When you finally decide to go silent, when you finally decide to stop chasing, when you finally decide to pull your energy back, something very interesting happens. Most people think no contact means the story is over. But in many cases, that's actually when the real story begins. Because the moment you remove your presence, the moment you stop calling, texting, explaining, and trying to fix everything, that's when a man starts thinking. And when he starts thinking, something else happens. He starts testing you. Now, before you get upset about that word test, you need to understand something important. These tests are not always planned. Sometimes they're subconscious. Sometimes he doesn't even realize he's doing it. But one thing is certain, if you went no contact and he comes back around, he is going to test you. The real question isn't if he will test you. The real question is how you will respond when he does. Because your response will determine whether he sees you as the same person he left or someone he has to respect now. When a woman chooses no contact, something deeper than silence begins to happen. It is not just the absence of communication, it is a shift in the entire emotional dynamic between two people. Before no contact, many relationships fall into predictable patterns. One person gives more attention, more emotional energy, and more effort than the other. Often, the woman becomes the one who keeps the connection alive, sending messages, checking in, trying to fix misunderstandings, and holding the emotional weight of the relationship. When that constant presence suddenly disappears, the dynamic that once felt stable begins to change. A man who was used to her being there starts to notice the difference almost immediately. At first, he might not react strongly. Sometimes he even assumes the silence is temporary. He may think she just needs time to cool off, or that she will eventually reach out the way she always did before. But as the days pass and the silence continues, something starts to shift in his mind. The certainty he once had begins to fade. What once felt predictable now becomes uncertain, and human beings are naturally curious when certainty disappears. This is where the power dynamic begins to change. In many relationships, the person who cares the most or expresses their feelings the most often ends up in the position of emotional vulnerability. They are the one waiting for replies, wondering what the other person is thinking, and hoping the relationship will move in a better direction. But when no contact begins, the roles often reverse. The person who was once chasing becomes quiet and focused on themselves, while the person who was comfortable becomes the one who starts wondering what happened. Silence has a powerful psychological effect. When someone who was always present suddenly removes their energy, it creates space for reflection. A man who was used to receiving attention without much effort may begin to realize how much emotional value that presence actually had. The daily messages, the support, the interest, and the connection that once felt ordinary now become noticeable by their absence. This is when curiosity begins to grow. He may start asking himself questions he never asked before. Why hasn't she reached out? Is she really moving on? Has she found peace without me? Is she talking to someone else? These questions create a kind of internal pressure. People often underestimate how powerful absence can be. When someone is always available, their presence can start to feel normal, almost expected. But when that presence is removed, the mind naturally tries to understand why. This is one of the reasons no contact can feel so difficult at first. It requires emotional discipline and patience, yet the very thing that makes it hard is also what makes it powerful. As the dynamic shifts, a man may begin to test the situation. These tests are not always dramatic. They are often small and subtle. He might send a casual message just to see if she will respond the way she used to. Sometimes it is something simple like, "Hey," or "How have you been?" On the surface, it looks like a harmless message, but psychologically, it often carries a deeper purpose. He is checking to see if the door is still open exactly the way it was before. If she immediately responds with the same emotional energy she always gave, the dynamic often returns to its old pattern. In his mind, the silence was temporary and nothing has truly changed. But if her response reflects calm confidence and emotional balance, he begins to notice that the situation is different now. The woman he once knew may no longer be reacting in the same way. Her attention is no longer automatic, and her energy is no longer easily accessible. This realization is where the shift in power becomes real. Power in relationships is not about control or manipulation, it is about emotional independence. When someone shows that they are capable of standing on their own without constantly seeking validation or reassurance, it changes how others perceive them. Confidence and self-respect are qualities that people naturally respond to, even if they do not openly admit it. No contact also creates an opportunity for personal growth. During the silence, a woman has time to reconnect with herself, her priorities, and her emotional boundaries. Instead of focusing on what the other person is doing, she can focus on strengthening her own mindset. This internal change often becomes visible in the way she communicates when contact eventually happens again. Her words may be fewer, her reactions calmer, and her standards clearer. That kind of energy sends a strong message without needing long explanations. When a man senses this change, he often becomes more attentive. What once felt guaranteed now feels uncertain, and uncertainty can make people value something more than they did before. He may begin to put in more effort, not because he was forced to, but because he now understands that her attention is something that must be earned rather than assumed. This is why no contact changes the power dynamic so significantly. It interrupts the old patterns and creates space for a new perspective. The person who once felt overlooked begins to reclaim their sense of worth, while the person who took the connection for granted begins to recognize its value. Silence becomes a form of communication on its own. It communicates self-respect, emotional strength, and the understanding that attention and affection should never be given endlessly without mutual effort. In the end, the real transformation is not just about how the man reacts. The deeper change happens within the woman herself. When she realizes that her time, energy, and presence have value, she stops giving them away freely to someone who does not appreciate them. That awareness alone is enough to reshape the entire dynamic of the relationship, because people tend to treat you according to the standards you quietly maintain. When a man tests you after no contact, it is often connected to a deeper psychological need to understand where he stands and whether he still has influence in your life. Human relationships naturally develop patterns of behavior. Over time, both people learn how the other person reacts, what they tolerate, and how much emotional access they have. When those patterns suddenly break because of no contact, it creates uncertainty. And for many men, that uncertainty can feel uncomfortable. Testing becomes a way for him to measure whether he can regain the sense of control he once felt in the relationship. Control in this context does not always mean manipulation in a cruel or calculated way. Sometimes it simply means emotional predictability. If he was used to knowing exactly how you would react, whether you would respond immediately, forgive quickly, or keep the conversation going, then that predictability gave him a sense of security. He knew how the relationship functioned, and he knew he could return whenever he wanted and still find the same emotional door open. But when you go no contact, that predictability disappears. Suddenly, he no longer knows what your reaction will be. That uncertainty is what often triggers the testing behavior. One of the most common forms of testing is the casual message. Instead of starting with a serious conversation or an apology, he might send something simple like, "Hey," or "How have you been?" On the surface, the message may look friendly and harmless, but psychologically it serves a purpose. It is a small signal sent into the silence to see how you respond. If you reply quickly and with the same emotional warmth you always showed before, then he learns that the dynamic has not truly changed. In his mind, the silence may have been temporary, but his place in your life is still secure. Another form of testing can come through inconsistency. After no contact, he might suddenly show interest again for a short time. He might start conversations, ask questions, or even seem more attentive than before. Then, without explanation, he might pull back again. This pattern can feel confusing, but it often functions as another way of testing your reactions. If you immediately chase the connection, ask why he disappeared, or become emotionally reactive, he learns that your attention is still easily triggered. In that moment, he regains a sense of control over the emotional dynamic. Sometimes testing happens through humor or indirect comments. A man might joke about how long it has been since you talked, or say something like, "You disappeared on me," in a playful tone. What he is really doing is observing how you respond to that statement. Does it make you defensive? Do you rush to explain yourself, or do you remain calm and balanced? Your reaction provides information that helps him understand whether the old dynamic is still available to him. Testing can also happen through social media behavior. He might watch your stories, like your posts, or interact with your content in small ways without directly reaching out. This is another subtle form of checking your emotional availability. If you respond by messaging him first or drawing attention to his actions, he learns that his presence still has a strong effect on you. In many cases, these actions are not random. They are small signals designed to see whether the emotional connection is still within his reach. The important thing to understand is that these tests often happen because of uncertainty rather than confidence. When a man knows exactly where he stands, he usually does not need to test anything. But when the dynamic changes and he no longer feels certain about his position in your life, curiosity and doubt begin to grow. Testing becomes a way for him to gather information without risking too much emotional vulnerability. Instead of directly asking deep questions, he observes your reactions to smaller interactions. This is where emotional discipline becomes important. The way you respond to these tests sends powerful signals about your self-respect and personal boundaries. If your reactions remain calm, balanced, and consistent, you communicate that your time and attention are no longer automatic. That does not mean being rude or cold. It simply means responding in a way that reflects emotional stability rather than urgency. Consistency is key in this situation. Many people maintain strong boundaries for a short period, but then return to old habits once contact resumes. When that happens, the dynamic quickly falls back into its previous pattern. The man realizes that the silence did not lead to a real change in behavior. But when your responses remain steady over time, it shows that the change is genuine. Your attention is no longer driven by emotional impulse, but by conscious choice. Another reason testing relates to control is that people often want to confirm whether they still matter in someone's life. Even when a relationship has ended or become distant, the idea that someone still cares can feel reassuring. Testing provides a way to confirm that feeling. If you react strongly to his messages or actions, he interprets that reaction as proof that he still holds emotional influence. But when your reactions become balanced and measured, it forces him to reconsider the situation. He begins to understand that your emotional center is no longer tied to his actions. Ironically, this shift can lead to greater respect. When someone realizes that they cannot easily control the emotional direction of a relationship, they often begin to approach it with more seriousness. The casual attitude that once existed may start to disappear because the connection now requires effort and intention. Instead of assuming your attention will always be available, he may start investing more energy to maintain the interaction. At its core, testing after no contact is about information. A man wants to understand whether the relationship dynamic has truly changed or whether the silence was simply a temporary pause. Your behavior during these moments becomes the answer to that question. Every response, every level of engagement, and every boundary you maintain quietly communicates the new standard for how you expect to be treated. This is why emotional awareness is so powerful. When you understand the purpose behind these tests, they no longer feel confusing or frustrating. Instead, they become opportunities to reinforce the growth that happened during your time of silence. By staying grounded and consistent, you show that your self-respect is not dependent on someone else's attention. And that quiet confidence often speaks louder than any long explanation ever could. When a man tests you after no contact, what he is really observing is not just your words, but your emotional strength. Anyone can say they have changed, anyone can promise that things will be different, but real change is revealed through consistent behavior. Consistency is the clearest signal of emotional maturity, and it is something people naturally pay attention to even if they never openly talk about it. This is why the way you carry yourself after a period of silence matters far more than any explanation you might give. Emotional strength is often misunderstood. Many people think it means being cold, distant, or pretending not to care. In reality, emotional strength is about self-control and balance. It means you are aware of your feelings, but you are not controlled by them. It means you can respond calmly instead of reacting impulsively. When a woman develops that kind of inner stability, it changes how others interact with her, especially someone who once experienced a very different version of her emotional responses. During a relationship where emotional patterns were uneven, reactions may have been predictable. If he disappeared for a while, maybe you chased the conversation. If he sent a confusing message, maybe you tried to analyze every word. If he pulled away emotionally, maybe you worked harder to reconnect. These reactions often came from a place of caring, but over time they created a pattern where your emotional responses were easy to anticipate. When someone knows exactly how you will react, they stop questioning their behavior because the outcome feels guaranteed. No contact interrupts that pattern completely. When the silence begins, both people are forced to sit with uncertainty. For the person who initiated the silence, the challenge is learning to focus on personal growth instead of constantly thinking about the other person's actions. For the man on the other side, the silence removes the emotional feedback he was used to receiving. The familiar reactions disappear, and that absence becomes noticeable. When communication eventually returns, this is where consistency becomes powerful. A single calm response can be dismissed as coincidence, but repeated calm responses send a stronger message. If he sends a casual message and you reply politely without rushing into long conversations, that shows emotional balance. If he disappears again and you continue living your life without reacting dramatically, that shows self-control. Over time, these consistent responses begin to paint a new picture of who you are. People often reveal their emotional growth through small details rather than dramatic gestures. The tone of your replies, the pace of your communication, and the way you handle uncertainty all communicate something about your inner state. When a woman responds from a place of calm confidence, she feels more confident in herself and is able to express her thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. It becomes clear that she is no longer operating from the same emotional patterns that once defined the relationship. Consistency also removes confusion. When someone behaves differently one day and then returns to old habits the next, it sends mixed signals. Mixed signals allow the other person to continue testing boundaries because they are not sure where the real limits are. But when your behavior remains steady over time, the message becomes clear without needing long explanations. Your standards are no longer temporary reactions, they are part of how you now live your life. This kind of emotional strength often surprises people. A man who once believed he understood your reactions may start realizing that he cannot predict them anymore. That unpredictability does not come from playing games, it comes from genuine personal growth. When someone becomes emotionally centered, they stop reacting based on fear, loneliness, or the need for validation. Instead, their responses come from self-respect and clarity. Over time, this shift changes the way he sees you. The woman he once thought he fully understood begins to appear different. She may speak less but communicate more meaning through her actions. She may show kindness but no longer tolerate behavior that disrespects her. She may still care about the connection, but she no longer places her entire emotional world around it. This balanced energy creates a sense of quiet confidence that naturally draws attention. Respect often grows in the presence of consistency. When someone demonstrates that their boundaries are stable, others begin to adjust their behavior accordingly. If he notices that disappearing for days no longer triggers emotional reactions from you, he may start communicating more clearly. If he realizes that casual messages no longer lead to endless conversations, he may begin putting more thought into how he reaches out. Your steady behavior becomes a silent guide that shapes how the interaction develops. Another powerful aspect of consistency is that it protects your emotional well-being. Instead of constantly analyzing every message or action, you develop a stable approach to communication. You respond when it feels appropriate, you maintain your personal priorities, and you avoid getting pulled into cycles of emotional highs and lows. This stability creates a sense of peace that makes it easier to make thoughtful decisions about the relationship moving forward. Emotional strength also builds self-trust. When you consistently act in alignment with your values, you begin to trust your own judgment more deeply. You no longer feel the need to seek constant reassurance from someone else's behavior. Whether the relationship grows stronger or fades away, your sense of self remains steady because it is built on internal clarity rather than external approval. From the outside, this transformation can appear subtle, but its impact is significant. A man who once viewed the relationship casually may begin to recognize that interacting with you now requires a different level of respect and intention. Your calm responses and steady boundaries show that your emotional world is not easily shaken. That realization often leads to a shift in how he approaches the connection. Consistency sends a message that words alone cannot deliver. It tells people that your growth is real and that your standards are not temporary reactions but part of who you have become. Over time, this quiet strength reshapes the dynamic between two people. The relationship begins to operate on a different level, one where mutual respect becomes necessary for the connection to continue. In the end, emotional strength is not about proving something to someone else. It is about developing a level of self-awareness and stability that protects your peace and guides your decisions. When that strength is expressed consistently, it naturally influences how others treat you. Without needing to argue, demand, or explain, you create an environment where respect becomes the only way the connection can move forward. Boundaries are one of the most powerful yet misunderstood elements in any relationship. Many people hear the word and immediately think it means being strict, distant, or controlling. In reality, boundaries are simply clear standards for how you allow others to treat you and how you protect your emotional well-being. When a woman responds to tests after no contact with healthy boundaries, something important begins to change in the dynamic. The relationship stops operating on automatic emotional access and begins to operate on respect. Before boundaries are established, many relationships fall into patterns where one person gives more than they receive. A woman may constantly respond to messages immediately, forgive behavior that hurt her, or continue giving attention even when she feels ignored or undervalued. These actions often come from genuine care and a desire to keep the relationship strong. But over time, when that care is not balanced with clear standards, the other person can begin to take that availability for granted. When no contact happens, it creates a pause in those patterns. During that silence, a woman has an opportunity to think about what she truly wants from a relationship and what behaviors she no longer wants to tolerate. This reflection is where boundaries begin to form. They are not about punishing someone else, they are about deciding what kind of treatment aligns with your self-respect. When communication eventually resumes, the way those boundaries are expressed becomes very important. Often boundaries are not announced through long speeches. Instead, they appear through consistent actions and calm responses. For example, if a man sends a late-night message after days of silence, a woman with boundaries does not feel pressured to respond immediately. She replies when it feels appropriate for her schedule and emotional space. This simple choice communicates that her time and attention are valuable and cannot be accessed at any moment without consideration. Another example of boundaries appears in how conversations are handled. If he begins speaking in a way that is dismissive, sarcastic, or disrespectful, then he is not a good fit for the role. A woman with strong boundaries does not engage in endless arguments to prove her point. Instead, she calmly changes the direction of the conversation or removes herself from it entirely. This action sends a clear signal that certain behaviors will not receive her energy. One of the most powerful things about boundaries is that they shift responsibility. Instead of constantly trying to control someone else's behavior, you focus on controlling your own responses. You cannot force someone to treat you better, but you can decide how much access they have to your life when they behave in ways that do not align with your values. This mindset removes a great deal of emotional frustration because it replaces pleading and explaining with quiet self-respect. When a man realizes that the woman he is interacting with now has clear boundaries, he begins to understand that the relationship operates under new conditions. The emotional door is not permanently closed, but it is no longer wide open without limits. Access to her time, attention, and emotional support now depends on mutual respect. This change can initially feel surprising for someone who is used to a different dynamic. In many cases, boundaries lead to an increase in respect because they clarify expectations. When standards are unclear, people tend to test limits simply to understand where they are. But when boundaries are consistently demonstrated, the limits become obvious. A man begins to notice that certain behaviors do not lead to the same outcomes they once did. If he sends minimal effort messages, he receives minimal engagement. If he communicates with genuine interest and respect, the conversation becomes more meaningful. Boundaries also encourage healthier communication. When someone understands that casual or careless behavior will not maintain the connection, they often begin putting more thought into how they interact. They may ask more thoughtful questions, make clearer plans, or show greater consistency in their actions. This change does not happen because they were forced into it, but because the dynamic now rewards effort and discourages indifference. Another important aspect of boundaries is that they protect emotional energy. Without boundaries, a person can become caught in cycles of overthinking, reacting, and trying to fix situations that are not entirely within their control. This emotional exhaustion often leads to frustration and disappointment. But when boundaries are in place, you stop investing unlimited energy into situations that do not show mutual effort. You respond thoughtfully instead of reactively, and you preserve your peace. Boundaries also send a powerful message about self-worth. They communicate that you value yourself enough to expect respect in your relationships. This message does not need to be spoken repeatedly. It is visible through your actions, the way you manage your time, and the calm confidence with which you carry yourself. People naturally sense when someone has a strong sense of self-respect, and they often adjust their behavior in response to that energy. For a man who once experienced a more open and emotionally available version of you, these changes can feel significant. The same connection may still exist, but the structure around it has evolved. He begins to understand that maintaining the relationship now requires a higher level of consistency, honesty, and effort. In many cases, this realization encourages him to become more intentional in how he communicates and behaves. At the same time, boundaries also help you evaluate the relationship more clearly. When your emotional energy is protected, you can observe someone's actions without being overwhelmed by immediate reactions. You begin to see patterns more objectively. If he respects your boundaries and responds with maturity, the relationship may grow in a healthier direction. If he repeatedly ignores them, that behavior reveals valuable information about whether the connection is truly right for you. The most important thing to remember is that boundaries are not walls designed to keep people out. They are guidelines that help determine who deserves a place in your life and under what conditions that place exists. Healthy boundaries allow love, respect, and communication to grow in a balanced way while preventing patterns that lead to emotional harm. In the end, when a woman responds to tests with calm boundaries instead of emotional reactions, the dynamic of the relationship transforms. Attention and affection are no longer automatic responses to someone else's actions. They become meaningful choices shared between two people who respect each other's time, emotions, and personal standards. And it is often within that environment of mutual respect that the strongest and most stable connections are able to develop.